black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
Having said that, I would say that this book, which was published in 2022, I probably began in 2016, 2017.
Wow, so about a 5-year period.
Exactly.
So you called it the counter-revolution of 1836. Why?
Well, as you know more than most, given your roots in the U.S. Southwest, Texas was once part of Mexico. But the slave owners of Texas, led by Stephen F. Austin and Sam Houston, who gave their names to two of the major cities in what is now a U.S. state, were opposed to the abolition of slavery in Mexico, executed by a president of African descent, speaking of Vicente Guerrero, 200 years, by the way, before the election of Barack Obama in the United States in 2008. And rather than accede to abolition, they seceded, fought a war, defeated Mexico on the battlefield, not least with armed resistance and supplies from the United States of America, and then began to expand the enslavement of Africans. In fact, when Texas was an independent country between 1836 and 1845, not only could the slave ships of the Lone Star State be found off the coast of Angola and Brazil and Cuba, but as well, keep in mind that these leaders in Texas were so full of themselves that they thought that they could challenge the United States of America, despite the fact that the States of America helped them to solidify their independence from Mexico. So it's a very tawdry tale, at least in the early stages. And I don't feel you can begin to understand why it is that Texas has the largest Black population in the United States of America as we speak without understanding this history. And I don't think you can begin to understand why Texas plays an outsized role in right-wing politics in the United States of America without understanding the anti-African sentiment that helped to drive independence and then statehood, and without understanding as well the bloody wars against the indigenous population. In fact, even though California might quibble with this point, Texas probably had the bloodiest wars of all against the indigenous population, which at the end of the day helped to create more land and territory for the enslavement of Africans.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and I would like to welcome you to today's discussion. It's going to be based on a book that I came across, this great scholar, Dr. Gerald Horne, and he wrote this book. If I get a close-up of the book here, The Counter-Revolution of 1836. Now, for those of you who are here who are familiar with Texas history, heard of this battle. In fact, the shrine to this battle is right here in San Antonio. It's not far from the studio, actually, maybe less than 10 minutes from it. It's called the Alamo. Now, everybody who go to school, any kid that goes to school here in Texas, by law, is I think around the 7th grade, you're taught the history of Texas is required, and you're told about this great battle. But they called it the fight for freedom. But I'm asking, and I'm going to be talking about this book by Brother Gerald Horne in this discussion to let you understand that. But the freedom for whom? Whom did this freedom was for? The Alamo wasn't only the birth, we are told that it was the birthplace of Texas independence. It was the last, but from an African-centered perspective, it was the last stand for slaveholders to find a nation, Mexico, that had outlawed human bondage. A lot of people don't realize that by the time of the Alamo, and I'm gonna go into more detail, Mexico had already abolished slavery. So those Texicans that you're told that were freedom fighters was fighting for their freedom to own people that look like me. And for those of you who are new to the show, my name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and I've been doing this show, and the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found, and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. And I want you to know that this is not to disparage anybody, but just to speak historical truth. Okay, the Alamo is a sacred shrine. I'm well aware of that. But just like a lot of the origin stories of America, we have to correct, just like I say, the mission statement of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce fact. And that's what I'm doing, where we find that many people are working on fiction, even the fiction of the Battle of the Alamo. So I got some images that I want to show to you, and we will discuss. Okay, starting with this book. This book was published, I think, in 2022 by this great scholar. I think I'll have an image of him coming up next, and it's the Dr. Gerald Horne, PhD, and he's a professor at the University of Houston, right up the street from us here in San Antonio, Texas, in Houston, Texas. This is another image of the great scholar. He's a author, as you heard in the video clip that he was interviewed by another great newsman in the video clip that he has written multiple books. Let's go on to the next image. Okay, and here's a little brief profile of what I'm talking about, this great scholar that I try to introduce when I do all my shows. He's an American historian, born on January 3rd, 1949, raised in St. Louis, Missouri. He holds the John J. and Rebecca Moore's Chair and Moore's Professorship of History and African American Studies, again, at the University of Houston. Educational background, he has a BA from Princeton University, a JD from the University of California, Berkeley, a PhD in history from Columbia University. So this brother is a well-trained historian and highly researched. And if it's not shows like the Umoja Circle, you would most likely never heard of him. Those of us who read these books know about Gerald Horne, but many of you might not have heard this, and he's writing about the Alamo and the Texas Republic that came out after it, found in this book, okay? This show presents Dr. Horne's 5 years of research for his 2022 book titled The Counter-Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery and Jim Crow. He uses this book to explain how slavery and the Texans' violation of Mexican constitutional law, like I said earlier, lay at the heart of the conflict that produced the great battle that we are taught from the 7th grade on in Texas, and by movies and other kinds of white-facing mythology, because what you see in some of those movies and what you've been taught, even in school, is based on an origin story that does not fit the correct narrative, like Dr. Horne has found from his research, 5-year research. Most of you think of the Alamo, you think of this. That's John Wayne and Richard Whitmark on the left, who played Jim Bowie, and Lawrence Harvey on the right there on your screen, who played Colonel Travis. And here they're fighting the vicious Mexicans, who you never really were told what the Mexicans were doing. That they would just want to, destroy these Anglo-Texicans with their army for just being freedom fighters. That's the kind of basic mythology that you're told, and this is the images that you're told. This is the images that's bouncing around in people's heads when we talk about the Alamo today. Like I said, it's only about 10 minutes away from the studio itself, and it gets thousands of tourists every day. Okay, I don't knock the the mythology, but it's a myth, just like a lot of things. That's the image that you will come across. That's the remainder of the shrine, I should say, to that battle. But it's a different story. Let's go on to the next image. Okay, and many of you might not. I'm a baby boomer, so I remember this person. He's a broadcaster. His name was Paul Harvey, and he has a quote that a lot of folks might remember if they're my age. He would tell history from another perspective. Okay, you might get the mythology or the history, but he always used this moniker. But then there's the rest of the story, and that's what I'm doing in tradition of Paul Harvey, the rest of the story you're not told in that 7th grade Texas history class. Let's go on. So I'll give you a little information who Paul Harvey is. Like I said, he was a legendary American radio broadcaster, famous for his unique staccato delivery and his popular segment, The Rest of the Story, where he would reveal the surprising, little-known details behind famous events or people after building suspense, concluding with his signature line, and now you know the rest of the story. That's how it's going to be when I end this discussion. He reached millions weekly with his Paul Harvey News, and the rest of the story covered historical mysteries and human interest stories with a conservative commentary. But I'm going to come from an African-centered commentary, but I respect what he's doing. Now, the rest of the story as we go on. What is the counter-revolutionary? Revolution. The book has said the counter-revolution of the 1836. Now, there's a revolution which starts really from the bottom up. That's when the people rise for whatever authoritarian system or abusive system is from the bottom up. But a counter-revolution is a movement that tries to stop a revolution or undo its changes and bring back the old system of power. That's a counter-revolutionary. And that's what happened in 1836, okay, which went against what was done by the Mexican government, which Texas belonged to prior to 1836 in the Alamo and the Texas Revolution in what was northern Mexico. They had got rid of the Spain and then they eliminated slavery, okay, from the bottom up, okay, the Mexican Revolution, okay, that is celebrated. But these Texans were, and you know, people like Sam Houston that was talked about in the video, and Stephen F. Austin, they did a counter-revolution. And the Alamo was the beginning of that counter-revolution. Those elite, those who were going to be in charge of the state that became Texas were slaveholders. So they want to undo what the revolution that created the environment that Santa Anna and the Mexican army was enforcing, that was in their constitution, that eliminated slavery. So that's why this book is called The Counter-Revolution of 1836, okay? In other words, it is an organized resistance against a revolution either before it wins or after it's already taken control, with the goal of restoring the previous government or social order, which was slavery, okay? That's what the battle, that's what they were fighting for, these Texicans, these white Texicans, okay? I know it goes against what people are taught, but this is the rest of the story. Let's go on to the next thing. Slavery and the defense of a racialized slave society were central motives in the Texas Revolt. And Gerald Horne argues that the Alamo should be understood as part of a broader counter-revolution against Mexico's anti-slavery project. Excuse me. Not a simple fight for freedom as you're told in the movies and in the classes. The revolt grew from Anglo-Texan defiance of Mexican law and constitutional authority, especially Mexico's gradual move to restrict and abolish slavery. That is what those people behind that wall called the Alamo was fighting against. Okay, they were counter-revolutionaries. Okay, they were the elite. who owned slaves, slaveholders who wanted to bring slavery from what was the United States and bring it west from the East Coast during the 1830s, 1820s. There was a lot of issues going on, as if you may understand from history, about slavery, the different compromises that were going on. The abolitionist movement. They brought Travis and these other slaveholders came west with their enslaved people that look like me. Okay, let's get that straight. In order to establish a slave state, okay, in northern what was northern Mexico that became the state of Texas. Let's go on to the next one. Mexico moved towards abolitions. Texas slaveholders moved towards secession. Okay, that was the points in the book. These are some of the points I want to express in the book. The Texas Revolution, including the Alamo, was a counter-revolutionary, a revolution to protect slavery. That was its purpose. Okay, Anglo-Texans repeatedly violated Mexican constitutional authority and law in order to preserve an economy based on enslaved African labor. The Civil War was established because of the same thing. Most of the economics of America, the largest economic system, greater than the banking system, greater than the mining system, greater than the farming system, was the slave system. That was the largest of all America's economic system, and it didn't change anything with these Texicans who came here to what was Mexico, okay? And here they ran up against a constitution that was established that went against their goals of maintaining enslavement and bringing enslavement to bring what they would call a cotton empire or a slave empire, that they planned to go all the way down into South America, if you understand the history of the Confederacy, and even into the island of Cuba. All this was part of the American history that many of you do not know. That rest of the story, like Paul Harvey would say. Let's go on to the next. The Standard story cast the Alamo as a heroic stand for liberty against Mexican despotism. But Horns asks, liberty for whom and at whose expense? By the 1820s and the 1830s, Mexico, an independent, majority non-white republic like Haiti, was moving unevenly but decisively toward restricting and abolishing slavery from the 1820s, late 1820s. Anglo settlers from the U.S. South were migrating into Texas with enslaved Africans and were determined that Mexican law would not destroy their investment in human property. This is the history that you need to understand and understand why we do the things we do today. Let's go on to the next. In the counter-revolution of 1836, Gerald Horne argued that Texas independence was not a revolution for freedom, but a counter-revolution to rescue slavery from a Mexican nation moving towards abolition. So you're not told that. And a lot of our Mexican brothers and sisters don't understand this truth too, that we've always were aligned with each other as black men and the Mexican people in this hemisphere against the abuse of the Europeans who came and took their land. Let's go on to the next. From the Spanish rule, I'm going to talk a little bit about from the Spanish rule to the Mexican independence. In 1821, Spain issued colonization regulations for Texas that formally prohibited the introduction of new enslaved people, declaring those brought into Spanish territory to be free, even as local practice often ignored the rules, okay? Just like people in Spanish Florida, a lot of enslaved people went south. Not everybody went to Canada, but you got people from Georgia or Alabama went south into Spanish Florida. The same thing happens from Louisiana and what was known as Texas, northern Mexico. People would go south into Spanish territory to be free. So there was a lot of black migration southward too. A lot of free black people escaping enslavement. But the northern Mexico, where these Texicans were, they were trying to by force, keep people enslaved. After the independence in 1821, Mexico adopted the Federal Constitution of 1824, which did not explicitly mention slavery, but was followed by national and state measures aimed at curbing the institution, slowly progressing towards abolition. Let's go on to the next. From the beginning, the Mexican state inherited and deepened a legal tradition that treated slavery as something to be restricted and ultimately eliminated, not expanded. This was in 1820, long before 1865 and long before the 13th Amendment in America. Mexico saw the evils of enslavement and did something about it. So it's always been an allegiance between black people and the people of the south of here in Mexico, okay? And if you're not understanding this history, then you would not understand why there should be an alliance, why we have always fought side by side, not everybody, but for the most part, those at the the revolutionary stage. The peasants recognized what was going on with enslaved people because they had to deal with their peon system. They had a different name for it, but it was still the same type of abuse, okay? So there was a recognition, and the government of Mexico at that time saw it and did something about it in abolishing enslavement. And that was a no-no for those who we considered the heroes of the Alamo. They were not with that. So again, freedom for who? You're being told that they were fighting for freedom, but it always eliminates black people, okay? Why? Why do we always do that? Well, that's the reason why we have shows like this, I hope, and authors like Dr. Gerald Horne, okay? In 1824, the Mexican Congress decreed that commerce and the traffic of enslaved from any country and under any flag was forever prohibited. This was in 1824, okay? In the United Mexican States, and any enslaved person brought in contrary to the law became free by the mere act of stepping on Mexican soil. So all those people that were enslaved by Travis, by Jim Bowie, that brought them to the Alamo were free on Mexican soil, but they were not freed by those Anglos. They brought them and forced them in enslavement. So there's a different image from a black perspective of how those men that we glorify as his heroes, or John Wayne, you saw in that movie poster, glorified the Battle of the Alamo. You always got to ask that question, whose freedom you're talking about? Anything that deals with American history the way it's taught to us, we always have to question whose freedom you're talking about. The founding fathers' freedom, when we have the discussion about the revolution, and he does another book called The Counter-Revolution of 1776. You should get that too, because the same issue was always around what to do with us, enslaved. Okay, and the contradiction of the words freedom and black people, before 1865 was always a controversial topic in the American Revolution. But that's not the history we're always told. As you can see, it's not the same history here in Texas either. Let's go on to the next. In 1829, okay, and this, some of you might know this, but many of you might not know. This is what, like Paul Harvey say, the rest of the story. In 1829, President Vicente Guerrero issued a decree abolishing slavery in Mexico. The decree alarmed Anglo-Texans who petitioned for and ultimately received an exemption at first for Texas, but it confirmed their fear that Mexico's long-term direction was abolition. This was what Travis and Jim Bowie and all those who fought at the Alamo and Houston and Austin were fighting against this abolition possibility. Let's go on. Let's go on quickly. Look at this black man. I said black man because Vicente Guerrero, this half-black Mexican, was the president of Mexico in 1829. He's the one who abolished slavery, Okay, one of his parents, I don't know if it was his mother or his father, was black. Okay, and the other parent, no, I think the mother was indigenous, native person, and the father was a black person. Okay, he would have to sit in the back of the bus with Rosa Parks. Let's just say this. No, not many people know that the person who freed long before President Obama, this was a black Mexican president. Of course, he got assassinated later on, but again, he freed us. Let's go on to the next. Here's this. Let me just give you a little bit about Guerrero's ancestry. Several recent historical studies and public historical institutions describe Guerrero as an Afro-Mestizo or Afro-Indigenous president, born to a father of African, or African-Mexican mixed descent, and a mother of indigenous or mixed background. Okay, let's go on to the next, and then I'll stop this here. These constitutional and legal steps showed that Mexico, on paper and increasingly in practice, was a state that restricted slavery, while many Anglo settlers in Texas wanted a future built on slavery's expansion. And I'll stop it right here or for this first show. So as you can see, there's like 500 pages in this book. Okay, a 5-year research. Like I do here at the Umoja Circle, every time I put on the show, I always produce facts. I base my information not on any assumptions of what I've heard. I do my research. And I want you to understand, and I try to introduce books that will back what I say so that you do your own research. Again, the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that people are studying fiction. Okay, just like the fiction that you're taught from the 7th grade here in Texas by law about Texas history and the Battle of the Alamo. There will be a part 2. So until then, peace, hotep, bye-bye.